In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, one God. If we can turn this mic down a little bit, please. Nice to be home. Nice to see you all again. It's been hard to believe, about a month since we just had a normal liturgy here in our own church. And it's nice to get back to normal. Well, as normal as life can be these days. You watch the news and you say, whatever happened to a normal life? In the time it took me to go to camp for 11 days, there were 3 mass shootings in our country. As I drove into church today watching the flags at half-staff, you think of the sadness that fills so many hearts this morning. As tragic as those events have been, another tragedy now is being laid on top of them. And that is that you see a political divide that I don't remember ever being worse. Perhaps it was. I don't think political divide is anything new. But I think because we have so many tools to express our distaste for others of other political persuasions, perhaps that's why it feels harder than it did before. And I think we have something that we can do about it. Today's epistle and gospel, both readings, talk to us about what our responsibility and our ability to do about this very difficult climate that we find ourselves in these days. So first, let's look at the epistle. St. Paul begins his epistle today saying that he begs. The word in the translation in English as he appeals. Much better translation, I think, is that he begs the church for unity. He says to the Christians that there should be no dissension among those in the Christian church. He even takes that unity to the point of saying we all must agree. What a high calling. That we all must not only fight any kind of dissension, but find agreement. This is so important that St. Paul begs for. He doesn't beg for very much. But when St. Paul begs, we ought to listen. And you know, the idea and the reality of unity in the church is something that sometimes we take a little bit for granted. We live out our social lives, or a lot of it, within the church, among our family and our church family. And then sometimes in living out that life and doing the work of the church, sometimes disagreements are seen as normative. Well, we have to really look at that again. We have just finished, as a parish, a monumental task. We hosted a North American convention. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that we did it perfectly. We didn't. But I can tell you that what I've been hearing from my brother priests and friends of mine throughout the country is that they were astounded, not just at the quality of the convention, but they were astounded with us. They saw such love and unity among us as parishioners that one of them wrote that they even experienced Christ and were inspired in their Christian faith by seeing you and I in our work for the convention. We're going to start posting some of the letters that I've been getting. I want you all to share in those wonderful messages of congratulations and appreciation. But it's important to understand, and those of you that were part of that work know that we did have our disagreements. Again, we weren't perfect about it. But I think there was an amazing amount of agreement, an amazing amount of unity, but it didn't happen automatically. It's important to know how we maintain unity in the church. And it's handled principally with love. We didn't all agree on every aspect of how to handle every event and every circumstance, but we listened to each other. We deferred to each other. We even at times shut our own mouths because others had a different opinion. At some point, we had to come to an agreement, and we just stopped talking. That's love, and that's humility. And the result of that love and humility was that others were inspired by it. People came here mainly for a good time. Some of them came to learn, some came to be inspired, but all were given a witness of Jesus Christ by our love for each other. That's not a small feat. That's one we should celebrate. And unity in the church should be normative. It should be the way it should be, not only because, but because St. Paul begs us to find our unity in the church. But you might say, well, that's within the church. What about out there? What about out in the world? What is our responsibility there? And here I will remind you that the church is not where politicians rule, although we put ourselves under their guidance. It's where the ruler of the church is the Prince of Peace and the King of Kings. That's why unity in the church must be maintained. That's why St. Paul demands it of us. And that's why it is so important. Christ said in his gospel, the Gospel of St. John, "By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples." And what is the this? That you love one another. It is the love of the people of the church, one for each other, that is one of the principal ways that Christ shows himself not only to the church, but to the world. Unity in the church is one of the most obvious ways Christ comes and is apparent in the world today. But it's true that the epistle is not the commentary on how we live our life outside the church. It doesn't address how to deal with political differences. And yet, I think if we listen to the gospel, we're going to realize that our responsibility to take the unity that we have here, to keep working for it, to guard it, but then not only to keep it here, but to share it with those outside. In today's gospel, people had thronged to see Jesus. Perhaps they had heard that he had done some miracles, or that he was teaching a beautiful new teaching. So they went to be with him. And all day long, what did he do? He healed them. It's one of the few times in the scriptures that Jesus, we hear a story where he doesn't heal just one or maybe a few people. He heals and he heals, and he's going on healing so long that the sun is now starting to set. And the crowds, perhaps due to the news of these miracles, has been growing and growing and growing all day long. It grows to the size that we hear at the end of the gospel, where there were 5,000 men present, besides women and children. What is that? 10,000? 15,000 people? Imagine an arena full of people, all out in the middle of the wilderness, all surrounding Jesus. And the disciples are looking out at that crowd. You can imagine the murmur of a crowd that size. And they're seeing the sun set and they're thinking, what are they going to do for food? So, in a very kind gesture, they go to Jesus and they say, Jesus, send them away. Dismiss the crowds. Let them go into the villages to buy some food. And Jesus says something to them that I'm sure astounded them. They need not go away. Can you imagine if you and I were of the 12, with 10 or 15,000 people around? We fed 400 and we spent months planning that. Imagine 10 or 15,000 people with no preparation. And Jesus says they don't have to go away. They were perhaps perplexed at that moment. Then the zinger came. He looked at them and he said, you give them something to eat. Wow. They looked at each other. What do we have? 5 loaves. Loaves, 5. And a few fish. And they stopped. And then Jesus taught them and teaches us an invaluable lesson. What the world needs from us, whether it's some food or whether it's a little peace and a little unity, where disunity and fighting break out so easily. And he says to you and he says to me, you give them some. They need not go away. So you and I have a high calling given to us today. Jesus looks at us. Just as surely he looked at the 12 and he says, you give them something. Sometimes that is a little bit of food or fellowship or a smile. I was so proud of our parish yesterday as we participated in the Camelot Block Party just half a mile away from here, where kids from all around our area who live in not the most easy of circumstances came together. They had some fun. We fed them a nice lunch. They played some basketball, got some preschool haircuts, and we sent them off with backpacks and school supplies. Jesus said to us, you give them something, and we did. It's a beautiful thing. But in this world where division has become normative, where anger and accusation has become standard, Jesus says to us the same, you give them something. My brothers and sisters, we have such a treasure in the church. In this realm where the Prince of Peace rules, we cannot keep that peace to ourselves. Very easy for flames of hatred to be fanned by a media that makes its living by fanning those flames, and by some politicians who earn their re-election campaign money by doing the same. In this world, you and I need to give back peace. In the year 1955, a woman named Jill Jackson Miller had gone through a deep depression. And she came out of that depression and she was so thankful to God after she had spent so much time so angry with so many that she sat down with her husband and they wrote a song. And they were called to go to a youth retreat, and at that retreat were teenagers from all different backgrounds, different racial backgrounds, different economic backgrounds. And Jill and her husband wanted to share what God had given them in thankfulness for what He had supplied after their difficult time. And they wanted those teenagers to go away with one message. Don't look to anyone else for what you know the world needs. Look to yourselves first. And they wrote a song, perhaps you've heard of it. And the first words of the song were, "Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me." Let it begin with us. We can complain all day long about those people. And if we're on one end of the political spectrum, we point to the other end and we go, those people. The world has enough of that. If we're going to point to those people, let's point and show everyone else why those people are worthy of love. Well, they need to be heard, and yes, spoken with the truth, but in love. And then, perhaps then, the peace and unity that God has instilled and poured into our church can spill out into the world that needs it so much. We have so much that we can take for granted so easily. So much peace and so much unity. Thanks be to God. In the church is where the light of the transfigured Christ shines, as you see on the icon in front of us. It's where we honor the passing of His mother, who gave life, human life, to the Son of God, that we could experience divine life. That happens in the church. So let's take all of that love and peace that we have. Let's build it first within ourselves, each one of us. Let's continue to work on that, take it for granted among ourselves as a church. And then let's let it share anywhere around us in a world that needs it so very much. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.